You can hear your own heartbeat. It echoes off the marble walls louder than the footsteps behind you. The saffron veil clings to your face, and through its thin weave you see the doorway ahead, not the threshold of a marriage bed, but something else entirely. Something the women in your family never named aloud. Flavia stops walking. For just a moment her bare feet refuse to move forward on the cold stone. She is 18 years old, and until this morning she believed she understood what marriage meant. The public ceremony had been beautiful, almost reassuring in its familiarity. The orange veil, the ritual braids, the witnesses smiling as walnuts scattered at her feet. Her father had signed the contract. The priests had declared the omens favorable. Everything had followed the proper order, the respectable sequence that every Roman family recognized. But now, as the heavy door closes behind her, and she sees the figures waiting in the dim atrium, Flavia realizes that the real ceremony is only beginning. And this one has no script she was allowed to read beforehand. Before we go any further, I have to pause and say it amazes me that a story this buried, this deliberately erased from memory, can still reach people all over the world today. If you're watching from another continent, another century of thinking, drop a comment. I think you'll understand why this matters by the end. The year is 89 A.D., during the reign of Emperor Domitian. Rome stands at the height of its power. Aqueducts stretch across provinces. Libraries hold the collected wisdom of conquered civilizations, and the legal system is so intricate that scholars will study it for millennia. This is a society that prides itself on order, on reason, on the careful documentation of every transaction and every rite of passage. Yet inside the house of Marcus Petronius Rufus, a grain merchant of respectable lineage, something is happening that will never appear in any public inscription. Something that hundreds of thousands of Roman brides experienced, but that history would spend centuries trying to forget. The paradox is almost unbearable. How could the same culture that gave us philosophy and engineering also create a wedding night that required medical witnesses, legal verification, and a ritual so disturbing that even ancient writers struggled to describe it plainly? The answer lies in what Flavia is about to face, and in understanding why her mother wept that morning, not from sentiment, but from memory. The atrium is larger than she expected, and far more crowded. Flavia had imagined privacy, perhaps a quiet moment with her new husband, to ease the strangeness of suddenly sharing a life with a man she had met only 3 times. Instead, 7 people stand arranged around the room like pieces on a game board, each one serving a specific function in a ritual that predates anyone's memory of its origin. To her right stands the pronuba, the matron assigned to guide brides through the sacred rites. Her face shows neither kindness nor cruelty, only the weathered patience of someone who has witnessed this scene dozens, perhaps hundreds of times. She wears dark robes and holds her hands clasped at her waist with ritual formality. Beside her, a priest murmurs prayers in archaic Latin, words so old their meanings have calcified into pure tradition. In the corner, 3 enslaved women wait with ceramic jars and folded linen cloths. Their eyes are lowered. They have learned to see everything while being seen as nothing. Against the far wall sits a man Flavia doesn't recognize older, with a leather bag resting at his feet. His presence makes her skin prickle with unease. She will learn soon enough that he is a physician, though his role tonight has nothing to do with healing. He is here to document, to verify, to serve as an instrument of the law rather than medicine. His gaze, when it lands on her, is not unkind. It is worse than that. It is neutral, professional, the look of someone appraising livestock or checking the quality of imported grain. But what draws Flavia's attention most intensely is the object in the center of the room, covered by a heavy cloth that reaches nearly to the floor. Its shape is irregular, too tall to be furniture, too deliberate in its placement to be accidental. No one has mentioned it. No one looks directly at it. Yet every person in the atrium is positioned in relation to it, as if the entire room has been arranged around this single hidden thing. The Pronuba steps forward and takes Flavia's hands. Her grip is firm, almost comforting, except for the absolute certainty it conveys. This will happen. Resistance is not a possibility, the ritual acknowledges. You have entered your husband's house, the Pronuba says, her voice carrying the weight of memorized liturgy. The gods must bless this union. The ancestors must witness your passage from daughter to wife. What follows has been done since the founding of Rome. It is sacred. It is law. It is the foundation of family and state. Flavia wants to ask what exactly will follow, but her throat has closed. She glances toward Marcus, her new husband, standing near the doorway. He looks pale, nervous, not with anticipation, but with something closer to dread. For a brief moment their eyes meet, and she sees in his face the uncomfortable truth. He doesn't want to be here, either. He is as trapped by expectation as she is, though his cage has different dimensions. The Pronuba releases Flavia's hands and gestures toward the covered object. The room falls into a silence so complete that Flavia can hear the oil lamps flickering. You must first greet Mutunus Tutunus, the Pronuba says, and there is something in her voice now, not reverence exactly, but a careful pronunciation, as if speaking the name requires precision. He is the god of conjugal beginnings. Without his blessing, no marriage can be properly consummated. Without his preparation, a wife cannot fulfill her duties. Flavia has heard whispers of this name before. Once, at a distant cousin's wedding, she heard two older women mention the god of the threshold, before falling abruptly silent when they noticed girls listening nearby. Another time, her mother had started to explain something about the old rites before her voice trailed off into an unfinished warning. When your time comes, you will understand that some traditions are not traditions at all. They are simply what happens. Now, as the Pronuba walks toward the covered shape, Flavia understands with sickening clarity that her mother's tears this morning were not about losing a daughter. They were about remembering her own wedding night 30 years earlier, about knowing that history was about to repeat itself and being powerless to stop it. The Pronuba grips the edge of the cloth. For a moment that stretches impossibly long, nothing moves. Then she pulls the covering aside. The wooden figure stands nearly chest-high, carved from dark, polished wood that gleams in the lamplight. Its shape is unmistakable, exaggerated, deliberate, impossible to misinterpret. This is no decorative statue, no symbolic representation. It is a phallus, massive and upright, carved with anatomical precision and mounted on a wooden base. The craftsmanship is excellent. Someone spent considerable time ensuring that every detail was accurate, that the proportions were not merely suggestive, but explicit. Mutunus Tutunus, the god whose existence the Romans acknowledged but rarely depicted in public spaces, the god whose worship made even pagan scholars uncomfortable. Centuries from now, St. Augustine will write about this ritual with such fury that he can barely force himself to describe it. Can anything more obscene be imagined than such worship It would be better to worship that shameful part of the body itself than to worship such a god. Other Christian writers will mention the practice in veiled terms: the indecent presentation, the preliminary rite, the preparatory violation, their evasions more revealing than any direct account. But Roman sources, the ones written before Christianity imposed its own silences, are more matter of fact. Varro, the antiquarian scholar, mentions that brides were seated upon the symbol of Mutunus Tutunus. Arnobius describes young women being brought before the god under the eyes of their husbands and families. Lactantius writes of the seat of shame that new wives had to occupy before the marriage could proceed. Modern historians have tried to soften these accounts, suggesting the ritual was merely symbolic, a brief touch, a ceremonial sitting, an embarrassing but ultimately harmless custom. But the ancient sources don't support that comfortable interpretation. They speak of preparation, of initiation, of the bride being opened to receive her husband. The words are clinical, medical, transactional. They describe a procedure, not a symbol. Standing before the wooden god, Flavia feels something fundamental shift inside her understanding of the world. This is not about religion. This is about control. About teaching her from the very first moment of her marriage that her body is no longer entirely her own, that privacy is a privilege she has lost, that witnesses, strangers, and tradition itself have more claim to her flesh than she does. The Pronuba positions herself behind Flavia, placing both hands on the young woman's shoulders. Her voice drops to something softer, almost maternal, which somehow makes everything worse. You must approach the god. You must present yourself to him. This is how wives are made ready. This is how girls become women who can properly serve their husbands and bear children for Rome. Flavia's legs feel like water. She tries to step back, but the Pronuba's grip tightens, not violently, but with absolute firmness. Marcus makes a small sound from across the room, something between a cough and a protest, but he doesn't move. The physician adjusts his position slightly, angling for a clearer view. The priest continues his droning prayer. The enslaved women stand motionless, their faces carefully blank. What happens next unfolds with the terrible efficiency of ritual. The Pronuba guides Flavia forward step by step, murmuring instructions that are both precise and euphemistic. There is no overt violence, no shouting, no physical force beyond the steady, unyielding pressure of expectation. But Flavia feels violated before anyone has even touched her, violated by the eyes watching, by the procedure itself, by the realization that this moment was designed centuries ago, specifically to break something inside a young woman's spirit before her marriage even begins. The wooden god is smooth, polished by the bodies of countless brides before her. As the Pronuba positions her, adjusting her stance with the casual competence of someone who has done this hundreds of times, Flavia's mind fractures. Part of her remains present, enduring. Another part rises upward, detaching, searching desperately for distance from what is happening to the body below. The witnesses don't look away. That's the point. Their presence transforms this from a private humiliation into a legal act, a verifiable component of the marriage contract. They are here to confirm that the ritual was completed properly, that the bride was prepared according to tradition, that no step in the ancient sequence was omitted. Time becomes impossible to measure. The lamps flicker. The incense smoke thickens. Flavia hears her own breathing, ragged and quick, and beneath it the low murmur of the priest's prayer, a prayer that places divine approval over an act designed by men. For men, to ensure a wife's complete submission from the very beginning. When the pronuba finally steps back and declares the first rite complete, Flavia's legs nearly give out. But there is no time to recover. The enslaved women move forward immediately with their jars of perfumed water, washing her carefully, efficiently, as if trying to erase the physical contact without acknowledging what just occurred. The water is lukewarm and smells of roses, a gracious touch that feels obscene in its gentleness. The physician rises from his corner. This is his moment. Before the wedding, days earlier, he had examined Flavia in her father's house, a medical inspection required by law to verify her status, to document the condition of her body for the marriage contract. It had been humiliating then. Now, after the ritual with Mutunus Tutunus, he conducts a second examination. He is checking for changes, comparing his earlier notes, verifying that the ritual has had its intended effect. His hands are clinical, his questions matter of fact. He is not cruel. He is simply doing his job, treating Flavia's body as a text to be read, a document to be compared against an earlier version. To him, this is no different than inspecting a shipment of grain or verifying the authenticity of a contract. Precision matters. The law requires proof. When he finishes, he nods to the pronuba and makes a note on a wax tablet. The first phase is complete. The bride has been examined, ritualized, and prepared. Now the actual consummation can proceed, but it too will not be private. The chamber prepared for the marriage bed is not a refuge. It is another stage. The door stands open by law, by custom. It must remain open all night. The bed is positioned so that anyone standing in the hallway has a clear view. The lamps are arranged to prevent shadows from obscuring what needs to be witnessed. Marcus enters the room after Flavia, his face drawn with tension. He is not a cruel man, but tonight he is not really a man at all. He is a performer in a ritual older than his grandfather's grandfather, and his performance is being judged by people who will remember any failure. His masculinity itself is on trial. The pronuba takes her position at the doorway, standing perfectly still, a sentinel ensuring that everything proceeds correctly. The witnesses remain in the hallway, their presence announced by the occasional shuffle of feet, the clearing of a throat. They don't need to see every moment, just enough to verify that consummation has occurred according to the requirements of Roman law. What follows is not intimacy, it is compliance. Marcus moves awkwardly, burdened by performance anxiety and the weight of watching eyes. Flavia lies still, her mind as far away as she can push it, that strange dissociative distance growing wider with every moment. She feels her body responding to touch it doesn't want, reacting in ways that have nothing to do with desire and everything to do with biological reflex. The betrayal of her own flesh is perhaps the cruelest part of all. The pronuba occasionally offers a comment from the doorway brief, formulaic corrections like a director adjusting a scene. The physician waits nearby, ready for his third and final examination once the act is complete. There is no tenderness here, no whispered affection, no discovery of another person. There is only the grinding machinery of tradition, turning two human beings into legal instruments. When Marcus finally withdraws, his relief is palpable. He has fulfilled his duty. He has performed adequately under observation. Whatever else marriage might become, this first night is now survivable for him. He doesn't meet Flavia's eyes as he stands, adjusting his tunic. There is nothing to say. Any words would only expose the ugliness of what they've both just endured. The physician returns. His third examination is brief, just enough to document the completion of consummation, to confirm that the marriage is legally binding in every sense. He makes his final notes on the wax tablet, and with that administrative gesture, Flavia's transformation is complete. She is now a Roman wife. The contract has been fulfilled. The law is satisfied. In the growing silence of the early morning hours, Flavia lies alone in the marriage bed, while Marcus retreats to another room. The witnesses have dispersed. The enslaved women have cleaned and departed. The pronuba has offered a final benediction and left. Even the physician has gathered his instruments and disappeared into the night. Only Flavia remains, staring at the ceiling, feeling the deep crack that has opened inside her. It's not physical damage. The Romans were too practiced at this ritual to leave obvious wounds. It's something else, something that has no name in Latin or any other language. It's the knowledge that her body has been witnessed, catalogued, verified, and approved by strangers, that her consent was never part of the equation, that the beautiful public ceremony earlier today was just decoration, pretty fabric draped over a transaction in human flesh. She understands now why her mother cried, why older women went quiet when wedding talk became too detailed. The silence was never protection. It was the only inheritance Roman women could pass down, the knowledge that some truths were too embedded in society to fight, too painful to name without breaking. What Flavia cannot know, lying in the pale morning light, is that what she has endured will one day vanish from history. As Christianity spreads through the empire, ideas of bodily privacy and marital sanctity will make these rights impossible to defend. Statues will be buried, laws quietly removed, examinations condemned as obscene. Within generations, the entire system will be dismantled and forgotten. Rome will teach itself a gentler story. Elegant weddings, joyful songs, saffron veils. The darker elements will survive only as vague condemnations in Christian sermons, too uncomfortable to describe in detail. All that remains are fragments, legal phrases about preliminary rites, medical references to marital preparation, angry sermons, and buried wooden gods no one could quite destroy. From these scraps, we try to reconstruct real human experience from administrative language. Flavia lived 42 more years. Her gravestone praised her as a model wife, but her inner life was never recorded. That silence, unwritten, unchallenged, is the system's greatest success, because silence leaves no evidence, only a cleaner story for history to remember.